This particular session, what I want to do is provide an overview of the bot and AI ecosystem. There's a reason I'm keeping that separate. Those of you who know why I'm saying that. And I'm also going to provide an overview of what serverless architecture is and how you can use it to benefit your project. And I'll point out some resources that you can use in order to get started and help your team to move that little bit faster with things. Might seem a little bit of a weird metric to use, but I thought this was interesting because I was talking with a few folks about the idea of creating things like custom hip chat bots back around about April time this year. And there's more about what happened in April time this year, which I'll come to later. But I just thought for a little bit of fun, I would go into LinkedIn Pulse and look at how many posts were being made which had bots, as a keyword within it. And at that point in time, there was about 5,096. Bearing in mind, of course, this was just reflecting 12 months of people posting things. So quite a few of those ended up mentioning a project which was started and shut down around about March time. Test your bot knowledge. Does anybody know which project I'm talking about? It's quite high profile. Yes, thank you very much. Okay, so Taeyeonju. This was an interesting AI-driven bot which learned really, really well, but from all the wrong people. And as you can see from the headline there, tastefully taken from the Telegraph in the UK, that Microsoft deleted their teen girl AI after it became a Hitler-loving sex robot within 24 hours. It learned really well, but from all the wrong people, right? Okay. So, moving forward to June, okay? So moving forward to June, do the same thing, and hey, maybe I should have got a bot to do that. Anyway, 6,855, a little bit more than what we saw the last time around. And the interesting point is that 3,759 of those were from the 6 months immediately preceding the date when that was searched. Fast forward a little bit now into October, right? We're talking about doing the same search again. We're talking about 9,000 odd. Now still, these aren't huge numbers, but what you're seeing is there's definitely some more interest in it from both a business and technical perspective. People care about it enough to actually be writing stuff on LinkedIn, Pulse, of all places. So numbers higher here again, so 4,332 of them within 6 months of that particular date. So there's a trend, it's going up. What becomes even more interesting though is when you start switching that out for a term that actually is more likely to be interesting. Look at the comparison. If you switch that out to artificial intelligence instead of bots, you're talking about figures like 280,000. And just from within 1 month of that, you got 15,345. AI is super hot. Bots are hot, but bots and AI, not the same thing, but a truly compelling experience is more likely to be created when you have a really good AI platform behind it. Many of you folks might know, particularly those of us who are very technically minded, that bots have been around since late 80s. So bots themselves aren't new, and a lot of them were there to be providing some sort of basic administrative functionality. Could be something as simple as, we need something to be logged in here so that this room doesn't get shut down, right? So just very basic, pragmatic things. The good bits, being able to access some relevant, timely information, be able to carry out some sort of transaction with a very low barrier. That's the whole conversational UI thing that Magda so very kindly took us through with some good examples. The boring bits, canned response type things, maybe just solving a basic problem, they're handy, but potentially not very exciting in terms of the way that you engage. Perhaps they're all a little bit flat in the way that they respond. Wouldn't it be nice to have a little bit of personality in there, injecting a little bit of the tone of voice of your brand? The worrying part, the whole dystopian future piece, people worrying about losing their job because a bot's going to replace them. There may be some roles which absolutely end up being automated out of existence. But the thing is, you can choose to look at it that way as going, oh, poor little old me, I've been replaced, or you can look at it as an opportunity to innovate again. So as we move on from there, just so everybody knows what I mean when I'm talking about a canned response, this is an example from the likes of a hip chat bot that I put together back around about April time. It was just a very basic thing for a bit of fun because at the time I was working with a team who liked to keep up to date with what's going on. And there's, I don't know if you guys know, but Pact Publishing actually give a free ebook every day. And what happens is that it refreshes in the morning, it's completely free. As long as you've got your account, you can go in there and download the book. There's lots of really interesting topics. Anyway, with that in mind, a bit of a pain to have to remember that while you're going around about your day job, so it's kind of nice to be able to be reminded about, hey, what's the book of the day today? There's only so much time to get the book of the day today. There's going to be a new book of the day shortly. Here's the new book of the day. Not everybody wants to hear that sort of stuff, right? So you can have a very simple way of interacting with it when you care about it, but don't want to go off to the website. In this case here, I set up the bot to respond to a few different phrases, and in this case, it was able to parse the phrase packed book of the day. And what it would do is it would just go off, send off a little request to the website, understand what the book of the day was, and it would give me a link that I could click. So this is where these sorts of things can become quite powerful. And you know, I really like the idea of the whole machine-to-machine communication thing, where you can, as a human, slot into that process if you like. You could have various different services within your organization, actually assuming a bot personality. This is speaking again to the point that Magda made earlier, right? So thinking about being able to break things down, doing one thing well, okay, that whole proposition of having, perhaps in this case, a bot who's a virtual team member, who fulfills a very specific role in the team. So if we need a custom bot, where do we start? Realistically, you're not going to be having that kind of conversation. You're more likely going to be looking at what's the problem we're trying to solve, and then finding a way to solve it gracefully. That's the ideal situation. Of course, solve it so that it's a great experience for the user and good all around. There will be others, of course, who want to just push something to the limit, to have the experience of building something for the sake of building it. So start off with the question why. If we're solving a problem, we're going to solve the problem, then use the results and iterate. If we're just experimenting, then we're just going to use the results and iterate. But the thing is, once you've gone through that process of the why, right, the how starts to become a lot easier, right? So either we're going to look at how we can build it ourselves, either we're going to improve our own delivery capability internally to make sure that we can iterate on this quickly and effectively, or potentially we're going to go ahead and outsource this. And who knows what that actually looks like, right? Because there's a lot of companies every day coming out who've got a platform or some other tooling, and you know what? Who knows what that looks like from a commercial perspective? The market's forever changing, so we don't know what that looks like for real. In many AI-driven bots, they need a bit of human help. I don't know if any of you folks saw this article, actually, but this was a good one back in April time. It was a Bloomberg article talking about how humans fill the gap in automation. And so taking some examples of those classic personal assistant type apps, being able to put in something a little bit fuzzy about what your meeting's going to be about and where it's going to be, they would have somebody analyze that and potentially tailor the response before it came back to the consumer. Now, some people might say, that's cheating. But is it? Because actually what you're doing there is you're really grabbing onto that opportunity to understand what problems you're really solving, right? Nothing worse than spending forever not getting to market because you think you're making something that's going to be perfect, just to find out that you were trying to solve the wrong problem, right? So why not have something that can continue to learn with a little bit of help, and you concentrate on actually understanding the range of the problems, the scope of the problems you're actually trying to solve. So the bot apocalypse is not going to happen on its own. It needs humans to make it happen. So do you need to start building something from scratch? Not necessarily, no. So lots and lots of platforms. I've actually got one up on the screen just now for a reason. And full disclosure, Alex, who's with us here tonight, Alex Boudreau, okay, his hand up in the air. Okay, I've known Alex for a while. I worked with him when I was at the Iconic. And one of the first things that he said to me when I met him was that he had a really deep interest in AI. And the thing is, once you get into any kind of a conversation with him on that subject, you start to understand that it's more than just a keen interest. The guy really knows what he's talking about. But Boomworks have developed a platform, and behind the scenes there's some really interesting smarts, and actually a lot of the stuff that Magda was talking about, being able to inject the personality, there's a lot of stuff coming. And I know that Alex is keen to share some tales from the trenches about what it's like to actually build an enterprise-ready platform. So that's something which I'm hopeful that he'll be good enough to talk with us about next month. So if you do decide to do it yourself, think about how important is the speed of innovation. We've now got greater access to a whole variety of different third-party services, APIs, etc. If you look at the likes of Slack, how many people are using Slack right now at work, right? So, about 50% of folks. Any other instant messaging platform? Maybe give me a quick shout out. What other platforms are you using? IRC, okay. Anything else? Skype, yeah. Okay, Google Hangouts, absolutely, yeah. So a variety of different platforms on the go. The thing is, a lot of these different products and services that are out there end up providing good API documentation and the ability to extend them with add-ons and all sorts of interesting things. With greater availability of tooling, services, and information sharing, it's becoming much faster for folks to get their hands dirty, create things, and then get into that whole product release cycle and feedback loop. If I was starting a bot project, which was going to be just about the canned response, which could potentially then lead to something which was going to be AI driven in the future, then I'd be looking at building it with a serverless architecture. How many people were at the AWS Lunch and Learn session today on serverless programming? Anybody? Okay. So I went along to it today, and there were over 200 people there. And it was packed out, and they had the technical evangelist, the principal technical evangelist, talking through a whole variety of ways that you can leverage serverless architecture. So thinking about the cloud, lots of people excited about what the cloud meant, because it meant that you could go ahead and spin up all manner of virtual servers. You can scale things up and down on the fly. It's much easier than the hardware piece, allegedly, okay? The next sort of major thing that I think of is application containers, right? So people were getting very excited about application containers. You've got things like Docker and so forth. Take just what they need to run their application, put it into a little container, and then deploy that container onto a server somewhere. Basically, if it runs in your development environment when it's been deployed, then it should run in your production environment just the same. It's this idea of immutable images of an application, that at the same time you're likely to end up having to do some kind of server admin, so there's going to be some requirement for you to get your hands dirty. So onward from there. Lots of buzz about serverless architecture, always a good resource going to the likes of Martin Fowler's site. You can also go to websites like a Cloud Guru. You know, they're doing a lot with the serverless side of things and helping to educate people in the space. Very, very interesting stuff. So it's essentially taking that idea of the application container, and it's like Amazon, Google, IBM, Microsoft, Azure. They're running that container for you. You don't have to concern yourself at all with what's happening with the actual configuration of the server. You get some very limited options. So taking it from there, let's understand that serverless, it's an approach, and there's also a framework. There was a framework which came out called the Serverless Framework, and a few people were a little bit upset about that naming. Do they mean the framework or the approach? You know, there's just confusion there right away. So no servers and configuration to manage, but you may still have wider requirements within the rest of your application structure to leverage a server. So if we're thinking about trying to provide that amazing AI experience, you know, the AI driving the bot, then there's a very strong likelihood that you're going to be running a series of private servers right somewhere. Why should you care about serverless? About April time this year, that's when the AWS Summit happened in Sydney. There was a lot of hype about Lambda coming out, because Lambda was released elsewhere, as far as I'm aware, around about April time of last year, and then it took around about June or July time for it to come out and be available in Sydney. And the example that was given was this example of a publishing company, the idea being that they have their servers, and what happens is somebody uploads an image onto those servers. They want to be able to resize that image and make it into a variety of sizes that are suitable for a given client to make their experience better, make it faster, deliver faster, all the rest of it. And what was happening was they were doing that on the same servers that they were actually using to serve up their code base, and running into a situation where their bill was high from their point of view. And certainly it could be from other people's perspective, because the figure that was quoted was in the region of $30,000, right? $30,000 every month. So that's an ongoing cost. It's adding to the total cost of ownership, regardless of what way you look at it. By taking that image resizing piece and pushing that off onto the serverless approach, they were able to reduce that bill down to around about the $300 mark. But everybody around me at the time was saying, well, this is great, but what if we don't want to be with Amazon anymore? That's one of the reasons why, in particular, the serverless framework stood out to me, because what they were saying was that they wanted to make sure that there was a way of taking whatever functions you're writing, whether it's in JavaScript, your Node.js, or your Java itself, or Python. You could look after that stuff in your own version control, and then use a simple CLI tool in order to deploy that and handle the orchestration that was necessary in order to run that stuff in the relevant place. There's lots of example projects, and in fact I wanted to just call out a few in particular. Elliot Spira, I don't know if you've met him before, or he works with Gorilla Stack. So they're a company who try to help people save money when they're working with Amazon. That's one of the key things that they do. So they help people to spin up servers and spin them down when they're not required. They actually went ahead and created a HipChat connector. So he went through the process of creating a tutorial, a boilerplate application that you can leverage to create your own serverless functions. So you might find that quite interesting. Check that one out. If you're trying to visualize what an architectural diagram might look like for a serverless application, then something like this. Appreciate you might not be able to see it too well, so I'll just point to it as we're going through here. Let's imagine that you can put most of the front end of your application into S3 bucket. So maybe it's a single page application written in Angular, React, whatever it is that you're using, right? That can live in an S3 bucket. You can use a service like CloudFront in order to distribute that across different regions as a CDN. You know, AWS will throw in a free SSL certificate for you. Then when it comes around to actually communicating with these functions that you've got up in the relevant provider, in the case of Amazon, you'll access it through the API gateway. So you go through the API gateway, and then potentially, after going through Lambda, you might do some back-end interaction with a database. The example there that's used is DynamoDB. So DynamoDB, mainly there from the point of view of just trying to say we don't want to manage any servers at all. We don't want to actually specifically manage a database server in that case, being able to access that directly like that. So do you have to build and deploy a front end with a framework like that? No, not at all. You could use it just to do the back end piece. And the workflow for it is going to be along the lines of set up your vendor configuration. If you don't know what I'm talking about there, with the likes of Amazon, you're going to have to make sure that you've actually got an account. And the good practice is to make sure that you create a specific identity and access management user. Okay, so you'll get an access key and a secret access key. And what you'll do is you'll make sure that you go through the CLI tool wizard in order to set up your local project and go forward from there. So if you've never done it before, there's plenty of examples out there and a reference one there that you can actually follow along with a video and a tutorial. So once you're up and running, it makes a lot of sense to actually test the back end of what you've created. And don't know if any of you are familiar with it or not, but a tool that I really like from the API perspective is a tool called Postman. So it's a REST client which also has an accompanying CLI tool that you can use for setting up collections of tests and actually running them. And you can do that as part of your build process. So recommending that if you haven't worked with it before, probably a good one to look at. More than happy to talk about it afterwards and share some tips and tricks, etc. So back to bots, how does that actually work? Good news is there's already lots of sample code, so AWS Labs have got some up there and running. You can imagine just having a single function which would be taking in whatever the request parameters are and then simply parsing through them, providing an appropriate response. Another one from Elliot Spira there, I'm mentioning as well. He's talking about how you can take your serverless application that you're building and actually run it locally without using any resources of anybody else's cloud anyway. So one of the common questions, and in fact one of the questions that came up earlier on today at the Lunch and Learn, people thinking this sounds great, but how do I actually work with this stuff? And how do we make this happen? And how do we test it? How can we run this if we don't want to use an AWS account or resources of any other provider? Well, that's the place to go to get the information about the tooling. Okay. From here, good to know that the serverless framework is just one of many frameworks which are evolving. A while ago, there was David Trevor who was talking at the Sydney Serverless Meetup about using a tool called Apex. And what he was saying was that to him, when he looked at using the likes of the serverless framework, it was like having this massive tool bag that you were going to carry around with you, but perhaps all you needed was a toffee hammer. Don't know if you've ever seen a toffee hammer before, but it's considerably smaller than your average hammer. So the idea being that it was a much more appropriate tool for what he was trying to do. It just did that one thing well, rather than trying to play to everybody. So from there, also a good idea to check out the Sydney Serverless Meetup group too. If this is something you're actually really interested in learning more about, it's a great place to come along, right? There's lots of people who are actually leveraging serverless now as the way that they build applications. So as much as possible, taking a lot of that business logic, even some of that stuff that you would consider extremely high value, and actually putting that into the front end and just going, we care about the speed of delivery and we care about the low overheads and how fast it is to iterate on this stuff. So let's just take the front end, put that up in the S3 bucket and minimize what we actually have to do in the back end. And from there, in terms of the information that's going backwards and forwards right now, you've got people who are actually in the thick of it, right? They're going through technical challenges with a variety of different frameworks, and not just the AWS side of serverless. They're dealing with the Azure Functions side, they're dealing with the Google Cloud Functions side, the IBM OpenWhisk side, all these different things. So very, very good to make sure that you acquaint yourself with that, join the community, and learn and share along with the rest of us as well.